And again, I was planning on flipping back and forth between my IDE, showing you code samples and stuff with this, but we've seen some examples, and I've got a few clips in the slides, so we'll just focus on that right now, and then Brett can cover it a little more because he's going to actually show how to start adding some components to a project. But you'll look and you'll see, like he's talking about the pages and components. You know, you're laying something out, and then it's got some code with it. And ideally, you want to keep the code in those components to a minimum, and just related to user interaction. You want to make it a good user experience. When you're starting to churn and do some calculations or munch some data and stuff, that should be down at the service layer or in another layer. Try to push as much as you can down. So that's best practices. And that's how I was trying to just differentiate between the different components. Okay, and then also remembering here. No, I want to stay in Chrome here. Let's go back to the. Oh, got a slide. No, my Mac's set up differently.
We might have changed desktop.
Yeah, that's what I do. A 3-finger swipe on mine, and it gets me back to the other desktop. Sorry, I did a Command Tab to switch windows when I should have just escaped. Let's get back to Chrome. Yeah, there we go. And then I want to get into the docs.
Yeah.
Oh, here's the Chrome window.
Oh, here we go. So that's where we're at.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Escape, and then over here to the docs. And so when you come in here in the docs and you hit components, all right, you're going to see, I should have expanded out there, but you can, it goes through and it shows everything. And so it's got the description on the left here, and then it's got the example, the screenshot on the right. So, because you got to learn their terms for everything. You know, what are badges? And I was expecting this to open up and show the list of them there. Maybe they haven't.
I think it does in the version 3, but I'm not sure about these ones.
And 4, not yet.
Yeah, it's not version 3. The documentation a little more full.
Okay. So these are all the different components. Buttons, cards. Again, you need to learn what they are so that when you're building your app, you know what you're after. You know what to go look for in the docs. Cards, yeah, everything's cards. It's kind of a material thing that's made it into the iOS world too. They've got the cards, and all the way down to check boxes, different styles, date time pickers. Fab is the floating action button that you get over there. You know, so you need to go through and familiarize yourself with all these different components. A loading component, I mean, that's handy. They don't have much there. Well, actually they do. Look, you click on it, and there it shows loading. So once you know what you have available, it makes it a lot quicker to build apps. All right, so the point on this was, oh, too far away. There we go. Is the that when you're going through those components, they've kind of intermixed some of them that you just drop in your HTML. So you go in and you put a card, and then maybe you ng repeat it, so because you have several cards, but those so that you're working in the HTML in that case. And so that's what I'm trying to differentiate here. As you're learning about Ionic, you learn what's template based, what's for HTML, and then you learn what is API based. So down in your TypeScript file, you want to pop up an alert when they hit a button, or a confirmation or something like that. You know, their confirmations are powerful. It's not just yes or no. They've got a whole bunch of options in there, but it's API driven. You access it from the TypeScript side instead of the template side. So I wanted to just differentiate between that, because as we move forward, we'll and as you're laying out your app and you're building it, you got to keep that in mind, and just realize in their documentation that they're just all listed there. They show the alert box or the pop-up or the or popover is what it's called, action sheet. Those are all things that you build in code, not in the HTML. So just wanted to make that one differentiation. But lean on the docs. They give you all the examples. So let's find the action sheet that was right here at the top. So okay, right there, show action sheet. All right, that pops up from the bottom. That's something that you write in TypeScript with all, you define the options and what they do when they click on each of these options.
Do these widgets behave differently depending on the platform, like on iOS than on Android?
A little bit. They look differently mostly.
Oh, that's cool.
So in fact, look,
That's another thing on the 3. You can tag between material design.
I was just gonna look for that.
If you go to the version 3
Yeah,
docs,
let's
you
do
can
that just to show you. We just jump
I
all the
think
way
just
back.
take out the beta.
Yeah. Ionic framework. Components list. All right. So here, if I go to something like Action Sheet in the version 3 version, then right up here there's iOS, Android, and Windows. Oh wait, see it's because your bookmark had lists on it. Let's go to Action Sheets. All right. So. And I've noticed the docs do this a lot. They won't let you stay. You gotta scroll around. It's funky. I'm just gonna scroll all the way to the top and then see if it jumps back again. Goodness, alerts, same thing. All right, so action sheets. Show action sheet. We got iOS selected, and boom, that's iOS complete right there. Switch to Android. And let me shrink this down just a little. Oh, you know what? I need to. I've seen this before too. I don't know. Do I need to cancel?
It's a bug.
Yeah, there's some things, but it's actually tucked up under here.
The Android one's just loading slower for me too.
Wow. Okay. Windows action sheet.
It just pops up.
So here's Windows. It's tucked under. It's kind of hidden. They've got this neat
That's
emulator
so
over
cool.
here, and sometimes it works for me when I'm going through the docs. But do you see how that's totally Windows right there, and Android. If I could tap on that pixel that's showing right there, we would see an Android version of an action sheet. So functionally they're the same, but they follow the UI guidelines of the platform. They do all the hard work for you. So awesome sauce with that. Oh, I keep jumping back too far. All right. So yeah, use the docs heavily. Not share, present. So like I said, you go in, you look up button, and you want to put it on your page. Your page has header defined, and it has nav bar and that kind of stuff in there. And then there's content tags, and you got to get real comfortable with where to put things, because if you don't build the component syntactically correct or semantically correct, then things won't line up or they won't work right, because the style sheets are all based on semantic correctness. So what I'm saying is the content of the page goes in the Ion content section. So make sure you're in there. And so Ion button, just drop it in there, and and you'll if you have questions about this funny notation and stuff, that's Angular, the latest Angular 2+. Do the event like that, but we'll get into examples when Brett actually builds some things out. So again, you go to the doc, you look at what you want, you grab a sample of code, copy it, you go over to your project in the content section where you want it, paste it in, view it, tweak it, and run with it. and a lot of template-based components that you'll use, and I put the most common ones up here, and we're gonna be covering these over the next couple weeks. I mean, even icons, you want to make sure there's a couple, when you're putting them in a button, you know, there's a place to put it. You do it as an attribute, or you can drop it in, and there's best practices and things that make it line up better, and you'll just put, if you take their samples include, you know, buttons with icons and nav bars with 2 buttons and all those things. So let me see, lists with items. We'll spend quite a bit of time on forms, just because there's good and bad ways to do forms, and you can just throw a bunch of inputs on a screen and then do a lot of work in the component and the TypeScript to grab all the values when you submit and do this stuff. But there's so much already built in for you that Angular and Ionic make it so easy if you do it the right way. So we'll focus quite a bit of time on that. And then grid layout. You want to be able, sometimes you gotta do some grid, even though you're on a small screen. Sometimes it's hard to do that, but you will need to do that. And it's a responsive grid, so that if they pull up your app on an iPad, if you do it correctly, if you do it right, it'll be very responsive and it'll work nicely on the larger screen. Okay, now I'll switch over to the code-based components. Like here's an alert. You want to add an alert to a page, then you're not working in the HTML file. You're working in the TypeScript file. So maybe you have a button in your page, and it calls a method, a function in your TypeScript, and then this is inside that method. This is just a segment of code inside there, and inside there you want to ask them something or present a message, and so I didn't even include the you have to brain freeze. You have to inject. Thank you for the word. You know what I'm saying. You need to inject it into your component in the constructor. And again, Brett will cover that when we do some coding samples. But so to use alert controller right here, your constructor will declare it, import it, and then you call it like this with a create with the different options for an alert. You know, there's the header, and some of them are optional, and then the message, and then how many buttons. So you can, it's super flexible, super powerful. And then after you create it, then you present it and wait for them to click before proceeding. Any questions about what we've talked about so far? Again, we got your template-based HTML components that you drop in and you lay out your screens. And then in the code, there are other components that you create and present and show the user.
Why are you using a weight on the alert here?
Probably mostly because it was in the documentation that way.
Okay. I'm just curious, I've never seen it like that.
Yeah,
That's a better way.
this is just a simple alert, so we're not expecting anything back from it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a couple different values, you might wait and then do something on the value. Well, or then you might have callbacks and other functions. So
Sure.
yeah. It must have required waiting for the user to click before proceeding. All right, and here's several examples of code-based components that they provide. The alert, the action sheet that we looked at, the loading, a modal. That's a full screen dialog. So boom, comes up, takes over when you need a lot of room, but you want to go back to where you were. You know, it's a pop-up like you used to do in other applications, web-based and things. and then a popover is a partial. It's really nice. The example they use, you click, but it comes up on half the screen, and it dims the main screen. It comes up, and then they choose something, and it's just really nice. It's almost like a menu the way they do it in their example, but it can be more than just a list of things. It can be several cards. It can you can drop anything into it. Really flexible. Toasts are great. When you're on a mobile device, this is a UX thing. You don't want to tell the user about everything you did. If you click save, and then you present a little message that says saved successfully, and then you have an OK. It's better to put up a toast, and it's just a little message that comes up, and then goes away after a few seconds. And there's options for that. You can say leave it up for 5 seconds. You can say leave it up until they actually hit the X on the side of it. A lot of options, but it just makes the user experience a lot better. If they're deleting something from a list, you don't have to tell them you deleted it. Just take it off the list. It's gone, and maybe have a toast come up and say, "Hey, deleted successfully." So we'll cover UX more later in the workshop. And then navigation, those are two objects you want to inject into your components whenever you want to trigger a navigation to another page. Nav controller, nav params, and we'll go into details about that. But that lets you navigate and pass data around. Any questions about these? Again, these are code-based components, so you're injecting them and you're creating them in the code. And then let me see. There's some things I want to make sure about the Ionic docs that wanted you to understand, because get out there and click around and read as much as you can in the docs, because the more you know that's out there, then when you get hung up on something, you can go and look and browse through, find out about it. Touched on several of these things. I bolded the beta because that's the 4X version. So you want to look for that in the top left corner of the docs when you're there. Make sure which version you're on, because some of them are a little different. You got a button or an ion button, and a few things changed between 3 and 4. Page structure, really critical. And as you're learning about building out page and the proper way to lay things out, not only do they have these starters like the tabs and the menu, side menu starter, and a blank one, but you can go out and get starters on GitHub, and you can also go to Ionic Market. If you search for Ionic Market, there's a lot of free templates you can use for a starter, and download them and look at them, see how they did something. Run it, click around, and maybe you see something. It's like, I need to do that right there. Pull up the code and see how they did it, see how they laid it out, and pay attention again to the semantics. This object, this but, or what's some examples? Like a nav bar. If you're trying to put some controls up in your nav bar, there's a proper way to do that so that they look like Android when it's on Android, and they look like iOS when it's on Android, on iOS. Yeah. Otherwise, vice versa. So yeah, there's a lot of great examples out there. There are problems with the docs. There's some of the topics or components haven't been fleshed out yet. And then you saw there's a few glitches on the little emulator on the side, but for the most part you can get around in there and see some great things. Yeah, and I wanted to mention the platform preview buttons, and that's in version 3 right now, but I expect they'll get that in version 4 eventually. Style options, SAS variables. Yeah, we're not going to talk much about styling options, but just know that there are some global settings that you can go in and change, and your whole app, you know, your primary color, secondary color, all those things are configurable in one place. So if some of your web developers, full stack developers, maybe you know before we had variables like this, you had to override certain defaults, and sometimes you had to override them in multiple places, and some people didn't know you can go in and edit a variable when there was one there, and so they're overriding them on every page and stuff like that. So be aware and ask. You know, is there you know, if you think of something that's like, that'd be great if I could just do this, you probably can. You know, it's structured really well, and so take a look at examples, look at tutorials. As you're going along building out your apps, we'll be leaning on each other and others in the community. So I know next week Corey's going to talk a lot about debugging and getting support and getting past roadblocks and stuff. But I mean, you guys need to know there's not only is there Stack Overflow that we all know about, but there's also the worldwide Ionic forum, and we have links to that. In fact, there's a link to that. If you go to our meetup on meetup.com, there's a link to that on the main page. I know I put it in every meetup, a link to the worldwide
The
Slack
Slack
channel, World Ionic Slack channel. There's also an Ionic forum but the Slack channel, because you go into one site and that's where you register, and then you use another site for actually logging in. And there's an Ionic Utah channel in the worldwide Ionic Slack team. Let me get my terminology right. Yeah, I messed up enough things.